In the time when the wind carried the secrets of men, and the old trees bowed only to the truth, there was a land called Faso. Faso was a beautiful land. The sun warmed the red soil. Rivers flowed like singing snakes. The drums used to beat proudly, and people danced with joy in their hearts. But that was long ago. Now the rivers had dried up. The drums were quiet. The people did not sing. They cried. Faso was no longer free. The land was full of fear. The kings wore golden clothes, but their hearts were full of lies. They promised food but gave none. They promised peace but brought war. They sat in their palaces while the people outside were hungry and sick. Bandits ruled the roads. They took what they wanted. They burned farms. They scared the children, and no one stopped them. The soldiers who once protected the land now only guarded the greedy kings. They looked away when the people begged for help. In the villages, mothers cried at night. They had no food to cook. Fathers had no work. Children stopped laughing. The sky turned gray. Even the birds stopped singing. The people asked, "Who will save us?" But no one came. Then, one night, something strange happened. The sky turned red. The moon looked like blood. The stars spun in circles, brighter than ever before. The animals were quiet. The wind blew slowly, as if holding its breath. In a small village, far from the king's palace, a woman named Maimuna was in pain. She was about to have her baby. Her husband, Yusuf, stood outside the little mud house, holding her hand and praying. He was a quiet blacksmith, strong and kind. The fire inside the house burned bright. 3 old midwives stood around Maimuna. They wiped her face and gave her warm water. But they were scared too. They had never seen the sky look like this. Something powerful was happening. Then, with a loud cry, the baby was born. But he did not cry like other babies. He opened his eyes and stared at the fire. His tiny fists clenched like a warrior's. His skin was warm, almost glowing. The moment he arrived, the wind stopped. The fire jumped. The stars above swirled faster. The oldest midwife fell to her knees and whispered, "This child is not like the others." Outside the house, not far from the village, an old blind man sat under a big baobab tree. He was a seer, a man who could feel the truth in the wind and see what others could not. As the baby's cry echoed across the hills, the blind man lifted his face to the sky. A soft smile spread across his wrinkled face. He whispered a prophecy into the wind. "From the red soil shall rise the one who walks with fire in his chest and truth in his eyes." That night, the red moon slowly faded back to silver. The stars calmed down. The wind blew gently once again. But the people who had seen the sky would never forget it. They spoke in hushed voices. "A child has been born. A child of fire. A child of truth." In a world full of pain, fear, and lies, a tiny baby had brought something new, hope. His name was Ibrahim, and though he was just a baby, his birth felt like the beginning of something great. The drums might beat again. The rivers might sing again. Maybe, just maybe, Faso would rise again. But for now, the baby slept in his mother's arms, peaceful and strong, and the land waited, holding its breath. Ibrahim's home was not big, but it was full of love. The roof was made of straw. The walls were made of mud. There was no gold, no shiny things, no servants. But there was always food to share and stories to tell. His father, Yusuf, was a strong man who worked the land with his bare hands. He grew maize and beans and fixed broken tools for neighbors. He did not talk much, but when he spoke, everyone listened. His mother, Maimuna, was gentle but wise. Her voice was soft like rain, and her eyes saw everything. She told stories at night, stories about brave warriors, clever girls, and kings who ruled with kindness. The children from other houses often came just to hear her speak. Ibrahim loved those stories. He would sit with his chin on his knees, eyes wide, listening to every word. But more than just stories, he loved truth. When other boys lied, he stayed quiet. When someone took something that wasn't theirs, he gave it back. Even when he was small, Ibrahim knew right from wrong, and he wasn't afraid to say it. One day, Two older boys were fighting over a mango. They pushed each other hard, fists flying, and people gathered to watch. Ibrahim, only 7 years old, stepped between them. "Stop!" he shouted. "The mango will rot while you both bleed." The boys blinked, surprised. "Let the mango go. Let the elders decide. Or share it." And they did. Another time, during the dry season, when food was low and danger was high, a group of wild boys from another village came and tried to steal the goats. While others ran to hide, Ibrahim stood tall. He ran to gather the boys of his own village and said, "We protect what feeds us. We stand, not with fists, but with unity." With sticks in hand, they guarded the goats all day, watching from the trees and rocks, shouting warnings. The raiders never came back. The elders began to whisper, "There is something different about that boy." Ibrahim never asked for attention. He helped old men carry firewood. He fetched water when his mother was tired. He listened when others complained, and always tried to fix what he could, even if it was just with a smile or a kind word. He didn't dream of being a king. He dreamed of a better land, a place where no one slept hungry, where no child cried alone, where truth walked freely and no one bowed to lies. He was just a boy, but in his heart something burned. Not anger, not pride, but justice. And the land, though still broken, began to notice. By the time Ibrahim turned 12, the world around him felt heavy. His village, once full of laughter and the sweet smell of roasted millet, now sat quiet like a tired drum. Crops no longer danced in the wind. Bandits walked the roads more boldly than farmers. Soldiers passed through, but only to take, never to protect. One day he saw his friend Awa crying. Her father had been beaten by masked men on the way home from the market. They stole his goods. No one came to help. That night, as rain hit the roof like falling tears, Ibrahim sat beside his mother and whispered, "Why do good people suffer? Why doesn't someone stop them?" His mother, wise and gentle, touched his face and said, "Perhaps that someone is being born among us." Soon after, the elders called a meeting. The Griot, with his deep voice and eyes like burning coals, said, "This boy is not like the others. He sees with the eyes of tomorrow. He must leave to grow into who he is meant to be." So the village, though poor, gave all they could. Bags of groundnuts, dried yams, a goat. His father sold his last radio. His mother gave him her woven cloth, the one she wore the day he was born. He didn't leave alone. An old uncle, once a merchant in the city, took him to Baba Kadugu, a retired teacher with a small home in the capital. They traveled by cart, by foot, sometimes hidden in traders' trucks. Along the way, Ibrahim saw hunger, children begging for water at dusty checkpoints, mothers crying by the roadside, men lying under trees like forgotten statues. Each moment carved something into his heart. "I will remember," he whispered. All of this. The city was nothing like the stories. It was big, loud, and sharp. Glass buildings rose into the sky, but beneath them, people slept on cardboard. Fancy cars drove past barefoot boys selling oranges. Generators coughed all night because power only came like a thief, rarely, and never when needed. Baba Kadugu, the teacher, welcomed Ibrahim with tired eyes and a quiet smile. "So the seed has come," he said. "We shall water it." He gave Ibrahim a mat near his bookshelf, a plate at his table, and a seat at his small school behind the house. Many students came there, some children of market women, others of politicians. But none studied like Ibrahim. He read history, philosophy, and war. He studied maps and revolutions. But more than books, he studied people. He saw a boy beaten for stealing bread, not out of greed, but hunger. He watched police shake down drivers for bribes, even the ones with babies in the back seat. He passed a hospital gate where a woman wailed, holding her dying son because they had no money for treatment. Each day made him more quiet, but more determined. He began writing in secret. "A leader must not eat until the village has tasted hope. If the law protects only the rich, then the poor will make their own justice. They call us weak, but they forget We are the roots holding up the tree. One night, Baba found his notes. He read them slowly, then looked at Ibrahim and said, "You are not just learning to pass tests, are you?" Ibrahim shook his head. "No, Baba. I am learning so I can fix what they broke." And it was true. Every face he saw suffering. Every child in torn clothes, every farmer cheated, every soldier who had forgotten his oath, became part of the fire growing in his chest. He knew his path would not be easy. He was just one boy in a broken system. But he also knew something else. Nothing changes until someone dares to begin. And so, while others dreamt of riches, Ibrahim sharpened his purpose like a blade. The city had taught him the truth. Power is nothing if it does not serve the people. And in the stillness of night, with his notebook open and the cries of his people etched into every page, Ibrahim made a quiet promise. One day I will return, not as a student, but as a storm. Ibrahim did not join the army to carry a gun. He joined to carry a question. He had seen too much. Too many old men making decisions while young boys bled for them. Too many generals who wore medals made of lies, while villages burned like forgotten candles in the wind. At 21, tall and quiet, he signed the papers. Not with pride, but with purpose. If I am to change the beast, he told himself, I must first walk inside its belly. From day one, he was different. While others bragged or laughed loudly in the barracks, Ibrahim rose before dawn, polished his boots until they shone like mirrors, and folded his sheets with edges sharp enough to cut bread. When the other recruits slacked off or accepted favors, he said only, "A soldier who eats with both hands forgets which one holds the sword." They mocked him at first, called him priest because of his silence, iron eyes because of how he stared without fear. But when the drills got hard and men began to fall, it was Ibrahim who still stood tall, sweat running down his face like rain on a statue. Then came the raid at Tamba Forest. A rebel ambush, loud, bloody, chaos everywhere. Their commander, a proud man with stars on his chest, was shot and pinned under a broken tree. Smoke choked the air. The others ran. Some shouted, "Leave him!" But Ibrahim ran toward the fire. Bullets flew like angry bees. Still he moved, calm, focused. He lifted the commander, carried him through mud and gunfire, and never blinked once. The next day, the commander offered him a promotion, a medal, a stipend. Ibrahim bowed and said only, "A real soldier serves the people, not his pride." The commander watched him walk away and whispered, "That one is not made of flesh alone." From then on, the whispers began. In the army camps, by fires at night, soldiers spoke of him like legend. He eats little, but his eyes never sleep. He walks through danger like its wind. The fire looked into his eyes and turned away, and slowly, men began to follow him. Not because they were ordered, but because they believed, not in his strength, but in his cause. And Ibrahim? He wasn't finished yet. He was only getting started. The land of Faso was breaking, not like a plate that falls and shatters. No, it was slower, deeper, like a tree dying from the roots. The fields, once full of golden crops, now lay empty. The soil cracked under the sun, dry like old skin. Farmers sat by their tools, staring into nothing. There was nothing to plant, and nothing to eat. Children with hollow cheeks chased flies instead of dreams. In the markets there was no laughter, only whispers. Food was too expensive. Money meant nothing. Even bread felt like a gift from the sky. Bandits ruled the roads. They wore no masks because they no longer feared the law. They came into towns like storms, stealing, beating, laughing, and no one came to help. The people cried for help. But the leaders in the capital were too busy dressing in fine clothes, drinking wine, and counting stolen money. They held meetings, made speeches, and waved flags, but no one in the villages believed them anymore. "They eat while we starve," said one mother, rocking her sick child. "They sleep under roofs while we run from bullets," said a father, building a wall with broken bricks. "They speak of peace, "But send no soldiers," said an elder whose village had been attacked 3 times. The trust was gone. The roads were dangerous. The police were few. And justice? Justice had packed its bags and left long ago. The elders of the villages gathered under trees. Their eyes were tired. Their hands shook when they held prayer beads. They didn't ask for riches. They didn't ask for revenge. They asked for hope. One night, during a meeting in the old village of Karaba, an elder stood up. His voice was weak but steady. "Once," he said, "a child was born when the sky turned red. The seer said he would carry fire in his chest and truth in his eyes." "Where is he now?" another asked. "Did he forget us?" a woman whispered. A silence fell over the gathering. Then, a child sitting nearby, no older than 7, spoke softly. "Maybe he is watching. Maybe he is waiting for the right time." The wind picked up. The trees rustled, as if listening. And across many villages, people began to say the same thing. "Where is the son of the red soil?" They had forgotten joy, but they had not forgotten him. And in the silence of their suffering, hope began to stir again. The land cried quietly, but Ibrahim heard it. The screams of hungry children, the silence of tired elders, the broken songs of mothers burying their sons. He could no longer sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw burning villages, empty plates, and men in gold chairs laughing while the people wept. He had served in the army long enough. He had seen it from the inside. He now understood. The rot did not live in the people, it lived in the palace. So he began to whisper, not loudly, not with anger, but with purpose. Under the cover of night, beneath old baobab trees where the ancestors once gathered, Ibrahim met with a few trusted soldiers. Not the ones with fancy titles, but the quiet ones. The ones who gave bread to orphans, who refused bribes, who cried when they saw children bleeding in war zones. They spoke in low tones with eyes wide open. No one brought weapons. No one shouted. Instead, they planned something greater, a rising not of blood, but of honor. "We do not fight to rule," Ibrahim told them. "We fight to restore. If one drop of innocent blood falls, we have failed." They met often, always in secret. Some nights it was by the river, where frogs croaked louder than their voices. Other nights, deep in the forest, where moonlight painted their faces like ghosts of warriors past. They used code words. They tested each other's loyalty. One wrong move, and they would all be hunted. Still, they moved forward, because the pain of the people had become too loud to ignore. Then, one night, as Ibrahim prepared to leave a meeting, an old Griot stepped out from the shadows. His hair was white like ash. His drum hung from his shoulder like a sleeping child. He looked into Ibrahim's eyes and said, "Even lions die, young soldier. Even fire fades. But if you must roar, roar loud enough to wake the sleeping ones." Ibrahim said nothing, but his eyes, calm and burning, spoke of a decision already made. The plan was growing. The whispers were spreading. And across the villages, across the dusty roads and forgotten corners of Faso, people began to feel something they hadn't felt in years. A heartbeat, quiet one, yes, but steady, like the sound of drums far away, coming closer. The sun rose slowly that day, as if the sky itself was holding its breath. In the quiet chill of morning, while the birds still slept and the streets of the capital were silent, Ibrahim stepped forward. His boots touched the dust like thunder that refused to shout. Behind him walked 17 soldiers, no more, no less, not chosen for their size or weapons but for their hearts. These were men who had seen children die in forgotten towns, who had buried friends for a war that never made sense, who had once saluted commanders, and now saluted truth. They marched not with fanfare, but with fire in their eyes. Every step toward the palace felt like walking through history. Vendors peeked out from wooden stalls. Children blinked from behind baskets. Elders whispered from behind shut doors. "It's him, the son of the red soil." When they reached the outer gates of the palace, the royal guards stood ready, rifles raised, faces cold. But then, something strange happened. One by one, the guards lowered their weapons. Not out of fear, but out of recognition. They saw Ibrahim's eyes. They remembered the stories. They too had lost brothers. They too were tired of kneeling to kings with no honor. The gates opened, not with force but with faith. Ibrahim walked through the palace courtyard, each breath steady, each heartbeat loud in his ears. At the grand hall, standing beneath golden banners, waited the corrupt general, the man who had bled the nation for years, hiding behind medals and silence. His sword was already unsheathed, glinting in the morning light. Ibrahim stepped forward alone. His own sword remained sheathed. There was silence. Even the wind dared not whisper. "You have no army," the general said. "No," Ibrahim replied. "Just a people who remember what courage looks like." The general's hand trembled. He looked around, no allies, no crowd, just 17 unshaken soldiers and the shadow of his guilt. A long pause. Then, the old man sank to his knees. He placed the sword at Ibrahim's feet and said, voice cracked and breaking, "The kingdom needs a spine, and I no longer have one. You are it." Gasps echoed from the courtyard. Ibrahim did not raise his arms in victory. He did not shout. He simply closed his eyes and whispered, "Let the healing begin." That morning, the people didn't cheer with noise. They cheered with tears. Because hope had not marched in with tanks. It had walked in with truth. And the silence that followed was not fear. It was freedom. The palace was silent. No drums. No fireworks. No royal parades. Just the sound of a chair being dragged across the marble floor. Ibrahim Traoré stood before the golden throne. Tall, calm, unblinking. Then, with both hands, he did something no one expected. He removed it. That massive throne, carved with lion heads and coated with stolen gold, had been the pride of many rulers. It had crushed dreams more than it had lifted hopes. Ibrahim ordered it taken away. In its place, he placed a simple wooden stool, the kind his mother once sat on while telling stories by firelight. He stepped forward, not in royal robes, but in plain cotton clothes, dusty boots, rolled sleeves. His voice was soft, but it carried like thunder. "I am not above you," he said. "I am one of you." The people, watching through tears, had never heard such words from the steps of power. Children laughed again. Elders nodded. The land breathed. In towns across Faso, the news spread like a healing wind. He's different. He eats what we eat. He walks without guards. He listens. And beyond the borders of his land, whispers grew louder. Not of fear, but of hope. From Senegal to Somalia, from Ghana to Sudan, young people sat up straighter. They saw in Ibrahim what their textbooks never showed them. A leader who bled like them, who didn't need to be feared to be respected. He was not just a president. He became a symbol. But Ibrahim did not stop at words. When it came time to build his council, his circle of advisors, he surprised everyone again. There were no kings. No men with 10 titles before their names. No generals with glittering medals. Instead, he called for a village teacher, whose voice still shook when she spoke. A rice farmer, who had lost 3 sons to hunger. A midwife who had delivered hundreds of babies with no electricity. "These," he said, "are the experts. These are the ones who know what the people carry." Some laughed behind closed doors. But the people, oh, the people, they wept with joy. For the first time, the table of power had space for calloused hands and barefoot wisdom. The land had found not just a ruler, it had found a servant. And in that quiet humility, young hearts across the continent began to dream differently. Not of escape, but of building something worth staying for. Not everyone was happy that the drums of Faso now beat with hope. Far beyond its red hills and broken roads, men in suits watched maps, not lives. They traced oil fields with gold-tipped pens. They measured leadership in obedience, not honor. "This boy," they muttered behind closed doors. "He's bad for business." They had been feeding on Faso for years, through fake contracts, hidden bribes, and puppets dressed as presidents. Now, this young man with fire in his eyes and dust on his boots was cutting the strings. Inside the country, those who once ruled from soft chairs and stained offices felt their grip slipping. They called him reckless. They called him dangerous. They smiled in public and plotted in silence. The first attempt came in a palace dinner. A foreign diplomat offered a bottle of vintage wine, smiling too wide. The cork had already been popped. The wine already poured. Ibrahim lifted the glass and paused. He looked into the diplomat's eyes, and then gently passed the glass to a waiting dog. The dog drank. Minutes later, it fell. Silence swallowed the room. Ibrahim stood and said, "Faso will not kneel again." Then he left without a drop. The second time it came from within. A young soldier, trusted, quiet, was given money to stab him during a midnight council. The soldier trembled as he walked behind Ibrahim. His hand gripped the blade, eyes full of fear and shame. But Ibrahim turned, and without panic, looked straight at him. "My brother," he said softly, "has your hunger eaten your heart?" The soldier dropped the knife and fell to his knees, sobbing. Ibrahim helped him up and made him his personal guard. The third attempt came in fire. A building in which Ibrahim was giving a speech was rigged with explosives. The traitors timed it to his closing words. But a young girl from the street, a cleaner's daughter who admired him, overheard whispers from two foreign agents in a tea shop. She ran barefoot to the meeting hall, screaming his name. Ibrahim stopped mid-sentence. He saw the girl, the fear in her eyes, the urgency. He ordered the room cleared. The building exploded 5 minutes later. Ibrahim found the girl, gave her a warm meal and said, "Your courage saved not just me, but our tomorrow." Still, he never wore armor, never let fear lead him. Instead, in every village he visited, even the ones riddled with spies, he planted trees. Not speeches, not flags, trees. He dug with his hands. He sweated. He knelt in the soil like any farmer. "A tree for the new Faso," he said, "so that one day, a child who has nothing can sit in its shade and dream freely." Soon, mothers began planting trees beside their homes. Students planted them at schools. Farmers, once too poor to dream, cleared land not just for crops, but for hope. And still the shadows moved. Foreign money was sent in sacks. Guns crossed borders under darkness. Rumors were whispered like poison. Yet the people remembered his eyes, his quiet strength, the girl he protected, the dog who died for him, the soldier he forgave. And the trees, they began to grow. Because while enemies plotted in shadow, Faso was learning to grow in the light. He could have ruled from a golden chair, high in the palace. He could have surrounded himself with guards, ministers, and fine food. But Ibrahim Traoré did something no leader had done in a long time. He walked, not just in the city, but deep into the villages, where the roofs were patched with leaves, where the ground was cracked, and where the people had forgotten what a leader's face even looked like. He wore no crown, no suit, just simple clothes, worn sandals, and eyes that noticed everything. Sometimes he came alone. Other times with a few soldiers, not to show power, but to carry bricks and help the masons rebuild schools burned by bandits. In one village, a teacher cried when he saw Ibrahim lifting a bag of cement on his shoulder. "You are the president," the teacher said. "Today, I am a worker," Ibrahim replied, "so that tomorrow our children can read." He listened to market women under mango trees. "Things are still hard," one woman said, her fingers scarred from years of labor. "Yes," he answered, "but your words are gold to me. Tell me what you need, and I will carry it back with me. Not in a briefcase, but in my heart." He spoke with hunters and herdsmen, ate roasted maize by the fire, and asked questions no leader had asked in decades. "What do you fear most? What would you do if you ruled for one day? How do we make this land safe again?" But he also came in secret. Disguised in old clothes with dust on his face, he entered towns without warning, to see how the officials truly treated the people. In one place, a mayor screamed at a young boy for asking for clean water. 2 days later, the mayor was removed. No explanation, just a letter that read, "This land belongs to its people, not to those who forget them." Word spread like wind through the fields. He does not rule from above. He walks among us. He is not afraid of dust or hunger. He knows our names. And so, when his sandals touched the earth of a new village, children ran to greet him, elders brought out chairs, and mothers whispered, "The son of the red soil has come, not as a king, but as a brother." And in every village he walked through, he left behind something no money could buy: hope. Ibrahim Traoré is still a young man, still walking, still fighting battles, some with words, others with silence, some with fire, others with patience. But even now, his story is already being told. In the dusty corners of Faso, under baobab trees and beside cooking fires, griots sing his name with trembling drums and steady voices. He came not to rule, but to remind, they say. He carried the burden, so we could carry hope again. In villages where the wind once only carried sorrow, songs now rise. Children with chalk in hand, dancing feet, and eyes full of dreams. They sing about the man who came from the red soil, who walked like a farmer but thought like a prophet. In crowded markets, where laughter once hid behind fear, old women now sell bracelets carved with his initials. Boys name their goats Traoré, hoping for strength and luck. "Eat well, little Traoré," one boy says. "Grow big and brave like your name." But it's not just the children. The elders, the ones who saw kings fall and promises fade, now speak of him with a careful hope in their voices. "He is not just a man," an old hunter says, sharpening his blade. "He is a sign, a whisper from the ancestors of what Africa could become." In the cities, in the villages, in the fields and classrooms, a new spirit grows, not of worship, but of awakening. Because his legacy is not gold. It is courage. It is the courage to walk without fear, to speak without lies, to lead without forgetting the ground you came from. And so, the story of Ibrahim Traoré continues, not in history books, but in footsteps, in rebuilt schools, watered trees, and the silence of bribes refused, in tears wiped by soldiers, and songs hummed by mothers who once gave up hope. His work is not finished. His enemies still watch from shadows. The road is still long, and the sky uncertain. But still he walks, and the people of Faso, and now beyond, say with quiet strength, "The sun of the red soil is still rising, and so are we."